It's a pleasure to be here to welcome Rabbi Joseph Edelheit. Joseph Edelheit has been named the Alum of the Year at the University of Chicago Divinity School. Congratulations to you, sir, and welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a unique honor.
How in the world did you find the University of Chicago Divinity School when you could have attended lots of places for your doctorate? Where did Chicago come into the picture?
I was a rabbi in Michigan City, Indiana, at Sinai Temple, and began doing some work at Valparaiso University, a significant Lutheran university in Northwest Indiana. And one of the dialogue partners, co-teachers at Valpo, James Moore, is a grad of the Divinity School. We began working together at Valpo, actually team taught classes at Valpo. And he introduced me to David Tracey, Paul Ricoeur, the idea of the Divinity School, and pushed me. Then I met David Tracey at 2 conferences. We talked, and lo and behold, that's how it started. I came to the Div School 10 years after ordination, someone who was already committed to interfaith dialogue. I didn't yet know it would become the moniker of my rabbinate, but I came to the Div School not seeking a credential to become an academic. I came to the Div School looking for greater ideas to foster how I would serve as a rabbi. Analogical imagination was the summer work prior to my application. And it took a whole summer, and that's all I read. And once you are inside that world, that's all I wanted to do, learn about that.
What jumped out at you early on about David Tracey's work as it relates to either Judaism, the study of Judaism, the practice of?
I knew you were going to ask me something about Tracey. Let me quote from early in the Analogical imagination,
Wonderful.
Because it's a passage I've returned to many, many times. He writes, "For the very complexity of the contemporary theologian's social reality can also occasion serious and rigorous reflection relevant to the social role of all intellectuals. The need to reflect critically upon real or apparent conflicts of claims in the different publics becomes crucial." That was something that immediately engaged me, Rob.
Reminds me of some work you've done on that as it relates to this question, which is, does monotheism assume pluralism? And in what ways did David Tracey's work, and of course the way you think about it, relate to your understanding of interfaith work as it was growing as a seed inside of your thought and work and life?
A monotheism is the bedrock of what we share, and took me inside the Christian Divinity School, and I went as a rabbi for the purpose of studying Christian theology. Monotheism, Western scriptural monotheism, is an anchor in which we all hold to the same God, a universal God that must be pluralistic in order for each of us to have our own understanding of that same universal God. And that's the radical pluralism that Tracey brought after his analogical imagination. I taught at Valparaiso for many years. I was invited to speak in the Chapel of the Resurrection. The dean of the chapel did not like the fact that a Jew, an ordained rabbi, was giving a sermon about the Holocaust in the Chapel of Resurrection. But I saw it as something that Tracy led us all to. I have had Tracy, Marty, Ricoeur on my pulpit in the synagogue. Same God, different discourse. That's what I would like to model, and I hope I have modeled, both in the pulpit and in my university courses.
You know, you can look at the interfaith movement writ large and say, oh, what an incredible success story. Lives have been saved, faiths have been enhanced, communities have been enriched on the one hand, and others would say theoretically it's been pretty much a failure. People have indeed not been able to come to as much solution and peace as we would want. Interfaith movement writ large or writ small, very particular in a community. What's your estimation of it now?
When I was 7 years old, I was called Christ killer for the first time by someone who lived across the street from me, who had just come home from catechism. That was in 1953. I didn't understand what had been said, but I would continue to want to know why someone who used to play baseball with me now did not believe it was appropriate. The issues of anti-Semitism, trying to understand how I was inherently to be marginalized because I happened to be born in a Jewish home, not a Christian home, have motivated my wanting to appreciate and be present to Christians so that they would then want to listen to and be present to a Jew. My seeking to be a rabbi was always about serving Jews in a Christian dominant reality. And my work at the Div School added to and helped me structure the way I handle interfaith conversations.
Interfaith marriage has been such a big part of interfaith movement, as it were. You're, in a sense, a scholar of interfaith marriage and well published in it. My questions around that are, what kind of progress have we made? And then what has been lost in the transmission of faith when you try to put two faiths together? Or
in the Reform movement, I'm a Reform rabbi. You cannot argue against the reality sitting in front of you. I have never given a sermon in all my years against interfaith marriage. Why would I offend people who are in the congregation? People who are not Jews, married to Jews, but committed to raising Jewish children. In 1939, there was a poll done. Would you want your children to marry a Jew? No. Today, yes. So we've been accepted, Rob. Is that the good news, or is that the risk we now take in, if you follow the Pew poll 2013, Jews are marrying out to the degree that we cannot project the solidity of a Jewish community in 25 years. What will that mean? I continue to want to dialogue with Christians about this. I am not at all sure Christians understand the threat that this is to the Jewish community.
Thanks for explicating that. It reminds me of a little bit of the work that a mutual friend of ours, David Saperstein, I believe he graduated with you, and he's been in Washington, D.C., our ambassador under Obama, and works across what I would think of as 4 areas. And when you think of identity, diaspora, assimilation, nonviolent extinction, especially the incredible work that our ambassador friend has done, Where does your mind head towards with those four words, if you get my drift?
Look, North American Jewish identity began with 23 Jews, refugees from Recife, Brazil in 1654. We began not as immigrants, but as refugees running away from the Inquisition. That's how we landed on these shores. We came because this was a place in which we could be safe and grow. But since 1654, we've always had to do it in a way that supported ourselves. And so the thread going through those four words is we are always self-determined. First thing Jews do when they come to create a community is create a cemetery. Then they create everything else. They know they will always be outside the dominant community. Isn't any different today.
If one said in a very broad sense that the Jewish people have given us great gifts of God, monotheism, Torah, Israel, I wonder if I had a fourth one to that, is modeling the outsider as blessing to a country. What am I missing? Help explicate that a little bit, and what do I have wrong?
You call it a fourth component. I would say maybe it is the most important changing element of how the first three are experienced.
Ah, nice.
So we have, since our decision to respond to the call of one God, Abram, Sarai deciding to leave in order to take on, in my mind, the most radical transformation in Western religious civilization. We're moving from polytheism to monotheism.
Ur of the Chaldees. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's go. Let's do this. We'll be a clan and become a community. The community will become a people destined to hear God's revelation, whatever that might mean. Finally, in 90, becoming diaspora, becoming outside the land in which we defined ourselves when the temple was destroyed in 70. But by 90, there is a group of rabbis who decide this is the way we're going to structure scripture. The Hebrew Bible, which becomes the cornerstone of what emerges as Christianity and later Islam. The fact that we can share a text is the fundamental relationship of dialogue and understanding. And that now goes to your way of reframing all three. Something is always happening in the context of being the reader of that text. We learned the same mantra, Rob. Every text has a context, and every reader brings her context to the act of reading. Understanding is how you bring those two horizons together. And that is the difference of the Jew today, 100 years ago, 300 years ago. We have always had to change our understanding of the context from within which we are reading the same text.
I love all that. It reminds me that, so in some senses, the Jewish people are outsiders yet blessedly central. But let me get back to this question of what does it mean to be the rabbi of a congregation? It's a big, big question, but take it where you will. For those of us who don't understand the history of that.
The word rabbi has always meant teacher. Synagogue Greek for synagogue, was originally Beit Knesset, a house of gathering. And then Beit Midrash, a house of study. Only finally was it a Beit Tfilah, a house of worship. So I do as a rabbi what Christian and Muslim clergy do in their institutional settings. I lead services, I give homilies, I teach, and serve during life cycle events. The context of how that synagogue has evolved is highly historical. So Reform Jews are a German export. Reform Judaism was the first movement. Reform comes before Orthodox. You can't have Orthodox without Reform. The word Orthodox means strict in comparison to.
To what?
There was simply Judaism. Then in the 18th century of Germany, we began attempting to create something other than. The French asked us, do you want to be French or Jews? Oh, really? There's an option? We didn't know that. So Reform Jews came to America, beginning in places where they wanted to be American and Jews. Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews come, and the tipping point of that balance is different and continues to shift. Now you have Reconstructionism, 1939. Now you have renewal. 10 Jews in a room have 11 opinions about what the Jew outside should be thinking. We make that joke all the time, but it's a serious description of an internal set of conversations that has never ended. Never. My job, and I was a congregational rabbi for 30 years, was to help communities emerge in their own self-defined pluralism. Not just a big tent, but I was asked to give people more knowledge to grow both individually and as a community. When I went to Michigan City, Indiana in 1976 for 9 years, where I began teaching at Valpo, that Michigan City, Indiana town had known Ku Klux Klan members marching down the main street in the late 20s. They were acutely aware of what it meant to have relations with the Christian community. That congregation was very different than going back to Chicago to Emmanuel congregation on the near north side, where there had an established rabbinate for many, many years, more than 100 years. My former congregation in Minneapolis, my successor, a female rabbi, put a Black Lives Matter banner on the outside of their building. They were within 3 blocks of, quote, the riots where George Floyd was murdered. So would Black Lives Matter be on a normal synagogue agenda? I don't know. It is on the agenda of the largest synagogue in Minnesota, in a city that was convulsed in systemic racism.
Love that description of synagogue and its development. It reminds me a bit of what you're talking about when I wonder about the question, are the Jewish people an ethnicity, a religion, a culture? You get to Paul Tillich's religion is the substance of culture. Culture is the form of religion. However one believes Tillich to be correct or incorrect in any instance, an ethnicity, a religion, a culture. I can explain people are culturally Christian, but not confessionally so. Can you take us to how that works for you in your mind?
Jews are a people. That is how the word Israel is used scripturally, not as a land. There are no Israelis until 1948. Israelites from the book of Exodus throughout the rest of the Hebrew Bible, that is the name of the community. Hebrews exists only in the book of Genesis. Israelites were a people born of a single patriarch, Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel. So there's this small Hebrew idiom that moves from the opening verse of Exodus 1, Bnei Israel, literally the sons of Jacob, to the 7th verse of Exodus, Bnei Israel. We now mean the community. So, community is significant as a self-defining reality. People begins to emerge differently and merges more quickly into ethnic community. So you have Eastern, Central, Ashkenazim, Western European, Mediterranean, Sephardim, North African. Those are truly cultural and linguistically, ethnically defined communities.
Swiss Lutheran, Polish Catholic.
There you go.
Areas.
That's it. So are we a people?
Yes.
We have been defined scripturally as a people. I find it in the 21st century difficult to convey peoplehood given the issues of diaspora, the modern nation state of Israel, and the diversities at war with each other in the many communities of Jews. People might be a textual horizon. I don't experience it often as a reality. I have always worked with God as an assumption, not as a epistemological proof. Here it is, go for it. Over the many years, people have come and sought my counsel. I'm an atheist rabbi. Okay? You've made an interesting statement about yourself. You've said nothing about God. So I work with an assumption. The word belief for me, I'm not going to argue how it's used for others. The context of belief, religion for Jews is highly diverse, Rob. I just said to a class the other night, there's a difference between observance and religion. You can be very observant, but not religious. That's the way maybe we would describe how Pharisee is sometimes misused in the Christian scripture, a hypocrite.
Alas, right.
You can be profoundly religious, but disregard observance. How do we expect religious institutionality to help people find a tipping point between observance and religion? I think that's very, very difficult. Now, 1 year into a pandemic where we have been forced away from the institution, do I need to belong somewhere? I've been able to do all this through Zoom and my iPhone. But you want me to pay dues and have a membership someplace? I think we're going to have to ask these same questions in a new way. We are a community historically, intellectually, that prefers questions over answers.
Beautiful.
Questions sustain conversations.
Hmm.
Is that dissatisfaction? Maybe. But questions are at the heart of rabbinic insight, basic hermeneutics. How do you open a text and keep the text opening? You need ways of asking questions that produce more questions.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
I very much appreciated the clarity of your returning to unsatisfied and dissatisfied.
Our newly appointed dean, David Nierenberg, who's been a great leader of the Divinity School already as acting dean, is a scholar in the area that touches a bit on your own work and certainly your own practice. Can you say anything about Dean Nierenberg's work as it relates to its importance for your own scholarship, but what does it come to mean to you?
We share a common concern that is not a focus of classic scholarship in this area, and that is anti-Semitism in the absence of Jews.
Mm.
My academic work at St. Cloud State took me to a university that had settled out of court a federal class action lawsuit on anti-Semitism inside the university and the allegations of poor employment practice. It became a class. It was settled. At the time I chose to retire from the pulpit rabbinate, I was approached by several people in the community and asked to help the university in understanding what the settlement would require. They then asked me to give them the curriculum of what a Jewish studies program at a university with no Jews.
Mm.
So I started as a consultant. I would later be hired, earn tenure, and become director of religious studies. The legacy of that position was the creation of Jewish Studies 180, Anti-Semitism in America. That course took me 4 years to get through faculty committees to meet the standards of a graduation requirement in human relations that had previously been the sole area of anti-racism. Nobody in the administration would publicly aid my work. In the absence of Jews, where there are no Jews on campus or so few that they hide, or their silence is the way they survive, you can't argue for a pluralism of hatred. In the absence of Jews, who defends the Jew who is angry that the Students for a Free Palestine are creating a one-sided story? My picture was taken, put up on Facebook. There was nothing I could do about it. Don't take classes from the angry Zionist professor. This is where Dean Nierenberg's important work is something I shared, but I shared at a very practical level at a large state university, not a important theoretical textual analysis. How do we cope with places in states where there are no Jews, but people are behaving in a way that needs to be corrected? Look, members of my family perished in extermination camps. I'm not going to attempt to be objective about this, but neither will I use my own personal history as a victim claim that then pushes me against triggering. I want to discuss this. I want to engage in the complexity, exactly what Marty, Tracey, and Ricoeur modeled to me. I think it's important in the 21st century, given the dark divisions in North America. Could you have believed while we were at the Div School that someone would march into a synagogue on a Shabbat morning with an AR-15 screaming, "Kill all the Jews"? No, I couldn't have. Do I want armed police with flak jackets standing outside my sanctuary? Do I have a choice anymore?
So beautifully articulated. Thank you so much. I want to take us back to Paul Ricoeur. Many of us had to slog through many complex articles and or monographs of Ricoeur's, but would it be an exaggeration, Rabbi Edelheit, to say you're one of the singular or lone Jewish voices in Ricoeur studies?
I have been. I have participated in the Society for Ricoeur Studies since its inception, now more than a decade ago. Paul Ricoeur wrote, and let me quote something I brought to the conversation. I maintain that the philosophical impact of hope has an important bearing on reflection. I learned the word reflection from David Tracey. It was my first doctoral seminar that he taught with Stephen Tolman. Each gave an essay, a significant paper, and then after several weeks, Tracey announced, we will now have 2 weeks of reflection. Then Ricoeur would help me understand it is from within reflection that hope grows.
Hope is a product of reflection of sorts.
It is, and our engagement in learning how to read a text, both critically and for the purpose of interpretation, was something that Ricoeur gave anyone and everyone who would sit with him. And he would sometimes literally translate a text again with you while you were in the class. This was someone who was a prisoner of war during World War II and could only get German books. And so as a prisoner of war, he translated Husserl from German and used that translation to teach other prisoners of war. So when you get to study with the likes of a Paul Ricoeur or watch a Paul Ricoeur and David Tracey teach a course together, yes, you walk away not with merely the content, but you walk away with the mentors, the models, and how they spoke with each other. And that was the imprint that I would take when I left the Div School and went on to Minneapolis, to St. Cloud State, my AIDS work.
That's a great way to think about the trajectory of your life and work. I love the Div School reflections. How does Ricoeur play for either the folks in the congregation, or Ricoeur play a lens through which to see your rabbinate, or ways in which to, filter through important midrash? I mean, what kind of lens does it for?
I found that attempting to translate Tracey's radical pluralism and Ricoeur's continental philosophy, that was a tough slog. and I would ultimately choose to use the analogical and the Ricoeurian hermeneutics in writing the book, What Am I Missing? Questions About Being Human, in which I take 6 biblical figures Abraham and Rachel, Miriam and Moses, David and Esther, and each pair represents a significant biblical reality missing one of the three defining characteristics: God, Torah, and Israel. Abraham and Rachel give us God. They are promised Israel, the community, but they precede revelation. They don't have Torah. Moses and Miriam have God intimately. They have Torah directly, but they are both denied entry into the land and have a fractured, fragile relationship with the community. David and Esther have more of Israel, as it were. They have Torah by way of the prophetic ethics, but they are denied God. Esther is one of two books in the Hebrew Bible that never mentions God. King David is denied when he asks, can he build the temple? No, you can't. You have blood on the hands. So, how is it that these three pairs, the most significant biblical figures imaginable, none has it all? And I have, for more than 30 years, thought about, what does this mean for our lives? And I've written a book weaving my life story, my rabbinate, and contemporary reality. You aren't supposed to have it all. Nobody has it all. The last chapter of the book deals with a glossary. I would like to remove the word perfect. I've been following the problem of perfectionism among teens and college students during the pandemic. It is a most terrible, suffering story. Instead of talking about perfect, could we talk about being complete and finished?
Having enough.
Having enough.
You're right about that.
Do we know when we have had enough?
That would be a most powerful reflection if we could all grasp that alone. What does it mean to be complete? Who is there to give you the blessing saying you have arrived? And you arrived at your birth, by the way.
I have 4 adult children, and I have watched in their own lives what each generation represents in the necessity of pursuing, not merely completing, not just finishing, or as I quote D.W. Winnicott, being good enough. The Divinity School might well be the best example the two of us can think of the rarefied academic realm and the generation of thinkers that we had, but we never called anyone doctor, mister.
True.
We were not put into a circumstance where intensified competition ever got in the way of conversation and learning. I would hope my little book asks questions that produce questions about, am I good enough? I don't need to be perfect. Moses wasn't perfect. Certainly David was not perfect. We could spend another 2 hours in conversation about what the Hebrew Bible and later Christian scripture does with King David.
So we're down to what I'm curious about. What did you learn at the Div School in just a couple of categories? You're the alum of the year. We care about what you picked up while you were here. You've lived that life. So can you help me out? The 3 things I learned.
Well, I am profoundly grateful to have been so nominated and chosen. I understand I am the first rabbi to be given this unique honor and a legacy that I will hope I can continue to articulate. What did I take away from the Divinity School? That it is situated on a campus, the confines of which were at the heart of a vibrant, pluralistic community of the whole, the South Side of Chicago. Not so today, but when the university itself sprang up, and the fact that a Baptist divinity school should be situated inside the University of Chicago, across the street from and part of a consortium of many religious thinking institutions. Being inside the quad would calm me. Literally standing in front of Swift Hall would calm me because it was age and invitation. That was my initial experience, age and invitation. The fact that we were invited to ask the questions that our instructors, our guides, our mentors would take seriously. This was not going to be anything like my undergraduate or my rabbinical education. These truly were, at the highest graduate level, people who wanted me to engage in questions, encouraged me to ask questions that cannot be ignored. And that is maybe the most profound gift I've ever gotten from education. And finally, we began with this, that what you study inside Swift Hall must be taken outside Swift Hall. Every single major thinker at every level in every part of Swift Hall taught, said, right, would directly engage me. Please, whatever you're doing, take it outside. That the academics was for the purpose of the world in which we live. And I want to conclude with the happenstance. Einstein said coincidence is just God's way of remaining anonymous. We are doing this conversation on a Friday morning, and this Shabbat, this weekend, are the final verses from the book of Exodus. The Jewish community will complete the book of Exodus. When we complete a book of the 5 books in the Torah, we say chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, let us strengthen one another. I don't think we could have picked a better day, and it was done by happenstance. But here we are, 2 people who learned at different times from the same human beings in the same environment. And we are truly, be strong in the world in which we are living, be strong, a repetition for what it means to go out into the world. We strengthen each other. So as I accept this award and I express my gratitude, it is for the purpose of continuing what I've been doing, to strengthen others. The recognition is yet greater impulse to continue.
It's so, you so beautifully said what has sort of been my mantra over these this quarter century. You know, is discover the question, investigate the question, live the question, and share the questions. And the irony is that the Divinity School became, for you and me and others, the launch pad for intense praxis. So we can joke all we want about theory, but yeah, you take theory to the streets, and that's what you've done. On behalf of the Divinity School Alumni Council, I'm so grateful that you've accepted this Alum of the Year award, and thanks to you for being a blessing to the Divinity School, to the world, and to each of us. Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you very much, Rob.